Zanele Dlamini never imagined her life would change so drastically when she stepped into Mkhuseli Nkobo's grand office that rainy Tuesday morning. The city of Johannesburg buzzed outside, but inside the imposing high-rise, Zanele felt completely isolated from the world she knew. She was just a poor errand girl, barely making ends meet in the bustling streets, her soaked shoes squelching with each step on the polished marble floor. Mkhuseli's office was as intimidating as the man himself, high ceilings, dark wood, and a panoramic view of the city obscured by the rain. Everything about the space screamed power and wealth. The man seated behind the large desk exuded the same, his sharp features and penetrating gaze making Zanele feel small and vulnerable. "Miss Dlamini," Mkhuseli began, his voice as smooth and controlled as the rest of him, "I have a proposition for you." Zanele's heart pounded in her chest. She had seen Mkhuseli on TV and read about him in magazines. He was a man who commanded respect and attention, but what could someone like him want with her? "A proposition?" she echoed, her voice small but curious. "Yes," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly as if calculating something beyond her understanding. "I need you to pose as my wife." Zanele blinked, certain she had misheard. "Your wife? But why me?" Mkhuseli leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her. "Because you are an unknown. No one would suspect you of being part of my world, and that is precisely what I need." He laid out the situation with clinical precision. A billion-dollar merger was on the line, but the conservative board members of the opposing company insisted on dealing with a family man, someone trustworthy. Mkhuseli needed a wife, and she was perfect for the role, completely off the radar. "This is strictly business," he stated, his tone brooking no argument. "No love, no romance. You will be compensated handsomely, and after a year, we'll part ways as if this never happened." Zanele's mind raced. The offer was life-changing, but the idea of living a lie, of deceiving so many people, made her stomach churn. Yet the thought of the money, the kind that could lift her out of poverty and change her future, was impossible to ignore. She glanced around the opulent office, her reflection distorted in the glass windows by the rain. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, but there was only one answer she could give. "All right," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll do it." Zanele's transformation was swift and overwhelming. She was whisked away from her one-room apartment to a life of luxury she had never imagined. Designers and stylists worked tirelessly to mold her into the perfect billionaire's wife. Her days were filled with fittings, etiquette lessons, and rehearsals on how to behave in high society. The woman she saw in the mirror was a stranger, polished and poised, yet deeply uncomfortable in her new skin. Mkhuseli remained distant, treating her as a business transaction rather than a person. They rarely spoke outside of public appearances, and when they did, it was strictly about the role she was to play. "Remember, no personal questions," he would remind her, his tone as cold as the marble floors of his mansion. "This is business, nothing more." Despite the rules, Zanele couldn't help but notice the man behind the mask. She saw the tension in his jaw when he thought no one was looking, the way his eyes would cloud with something resembling pain when he spoke about his past, though he never divulged details. There was a deep, unspoken sadness in him that both intrigued and unnerved her. As the days turned into weeks, Zanele struggled with her growing internal conflict. She was losing herself in this new life, becoming someone she didn't recognize. Every night, alone in her luxurious bedroom, she would lie awake, wondering if she had made the right choice. And yet, there were moments, fleeting, subtle moments where she felt a connection with Mkhuseli, a shared glance, a softening in his expression, a brief touch of his hand. She knew she shouldn't care, that this was all a facade, but those moments made it harder to keep her emotions in check. The merger was proceeding smoothly, and Zanele had become adept at playing her role. The board members were charmed by the loving couple, and the deal seemed all but sealed. But just as everything was falling into place, a complication arose that threw Zanele's carefully controlled world into chaos. One evening, at a high-profile charity event, Zanele noticed a woman watching them from across the room. She was strikingly beautiful, with an air of familiarity about her that Zanele couldn't place. The moment Mkhuseli saw her, his entire demeanor shifted, his usual cool confidence replaced by a tension that set Zanele on edge. Later that night, as they prepared to retire to their separate rooms, Zanele couldn't suppress her curiosity. "Who was that woman at the event?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual despite the turmoil in her chest. Mkhuseli's response was curt, almost dismissive. "Just someone from the past. It's nothing you need to worry about." But the tightness in his voice, the way he avoided her gaze, told Zanele that this woman was far from insignificant. A few days later, her suspicions were confirmed when she received a mysterious letter, delivered to her in the dead of night. It was from the woman. Her name was Thandiwe, and she claimed to be Mkhuseli's ex-fiancé. The letter was filled with accusations, painting Mkhuseli as a cold, calculating man who had destroyed her life. Thandiwe warned Zanele that she was just another pawn in his game, a tool he was using to achieve his ends. She urged Zanele to be careful, to not trust him with her heart. Zanele's hands shook as she read the letter, her mind reeling. Was Thandiwe telling the truth? Had she been naive to think there was more to Mkhuseli than what he showed the world? Doubts began to creep in, and for the first time, Zanele found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about the man she was pretending to be married to. Determined to uncover the truth, Zanele began to dig into Mkhuseli's past. She spoke to people who had known him and pieced together stories and rumors until she had a clearer picture of the man she was living with. Thandiwe's accusations were not without merit. Mkhuseli had indeed used people to climb the corporate ladder, manipulating them to secure his place at the top. But the most shocking revelation was the depth of the betrayal that had shaped him. Through her inquiries, Zanele learned that Mkhuseli had once been deeply in love with Thandiwe. Their relationship had been passionate and intense, but it ended in tragedy when Thandiwe betrayed him for his business rival. The betrayal had left Mkhuseli shattered, not just emotionally, but financially as well. It was the event that turned him into the cold, calculating man he had become. Zanele confronted Mkhuseli with what she had discovered. She demanded to know the truth about Thandiwe, about why he had chosen her for this charade, and whether there was any part of him that wasn't driven by cold calculation. Mkhuseli's facade finally cracked. He admitted everything, revealing the pain and betrayal that had shaped him into the man he is today. He confessed that he had chosen Zanele because she reminded him of who he used to be, innocent, untainted by the world of wealth and power. But more than that, despite all his efforts to keep his heart closed, he had fallen in love with her. "I didn't want this," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I didn't want to feel anything again, but you've made me remember what it's like to care." Zanele was torn. She had been hurt by his deception, but she couldn't deny her own feelings for him. She had seen the vulnerability in him, the brokenness that mirrored her own fears of being used and discarded. But could she really trust him after everything that had happened? The merger was finalized, and the charade was officially over. Zanele was free to leave, to return to her old life. but the decision weighed heavily on her. She had come to care for Mkhuseli, but the trust between them had been shattered. In the days following the merger's completion, Mkhuseli became more withdrawn, as if preparing himself for the inevitable separation. The moments of connection they had shared now felt like ghosts, haunting the empty spaces between them. Zanele found herself wrestling with conflicting emotions. Could she forgive him, or was it too late? In the end, Zanele chose to walk away. She returned to her modest life, leaving behind the wealth, the lies, and the man who had both deceived and captivated her. It was a painful decision, but one she knew was necessary. She needed to rediscover herself, to find her own path without the shadow of Mkhuseli's world looming over her. Zanele Dlamini stood outside Mkhuseli Nkobo's mansion, the weight of her decision pressing down on her shoulders. The cold Johannesburg air bittered her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth she had left behind inside. She had chosen to walk away from the life of luxury and deception, but as she took her first steps back into her old life, she felt a confusing mix of relief and loss. The experience had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand, and now she was stepping into a future that felt both familiar and foreign. As she walked through the city streets, she reflected on the whirlwind of the past year. She had been thrust into a world of opulence and power, becoming entangled with a man who was both her benefactor and her captor in emotional ways. But now it was time to reclaim her life on her own terms, free from the constraints of a deal that had nearly consumed her. Back in her modest apartment, Zanele felt a strange sense of peace. The small space, with its worn furniture and cluttered shelves, was a far cry from the luxury of Mkhuseli's mansion, but it was hers. It represented a life she had built with her own hands, not one handed to her through a contract. She resumed her old routines with a renewed sense of purpose. She enrolled in evening classes, determined to finish her education and carve out a new path. She also started volunteering at a local community center, using the skills she had learned during her time with Mkhuseli to help others in need. Yet, as much as she tried to focus on her new life, Mkhuseli lingered in her thoughts. She wondered how he was coping, whether he had found peace or was still trapped in the same emotional cage that had driven him to propose their arrangement in the first place. Mkhuseli Nkobo was finding it difficult to adapt to life without Zanele. The merger had been finalized. His business empire was flourishing, yet a profound emptiness had settled in his heart. He had always been a man of control, carefully guarding his emotions. But Zanele had managed to break through his defenses, leaving him vulnerable in a way he had never anticipated. He replayed their moments together in his mind, realizing that somewhere along the way, Zanele had become more than just a pawn in his game. She had become someone he cared about deeply, someone he wanted in his life, not out of necessity, but out of genuine affection. The thought of her walking away, not just from his house, but from his life, left him with a sense of unfinished business. Mkhuseli knew he had wronged her, but he also knew that if he didn't confront his feelings and make things right, he would never forgive himself. One evening, as he sat alone in his vast, empty mansion, he made a decision. He couldn't let her go without addressing what had been left unsaid, without facing the consequences of his actions. He needed to find her, to talk to her, not as the man who had controlled her life, but as the man who had fallen for her. Zanele was in the middle of her evening class when her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment, feeling a strange premonition before stepping into the hallway to answer. "Zanele," came the familiar deep voice that sent a shiver down her spine. "It's Mkhuseli." Her heart skipped a beat. "Mkhuseli, Why are you calling? There are things we need to talk about, he replied, his voice softer than she remembered. I owe you an explanation and an apology. Zanele's mind raced. She had spent weeks trying to distance herself from everything that had happened, but now the past was catching up with her. When and where? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe in the city, a place far removed from the luxury and power that had defined their previous interactions. When Zanele arrived, she found Mkhuseli already seated, looking more casual and vulnerable than she had ever seen him. The confident, intimidating man she remembered was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely uncertain, almost lost. Thank you for coming, Mkhuseli said, as she sat down across from him. There was a sincerity in his eyes that caught her off guard. You said you wanted to talk, Zanele replied, keeping her tone neutral. So talk. Mkhuseli took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. I've been doing a lot of thinking since you left, about everything that happened between us and about the choices I made. I was wrong to treat you the way I did, to use you as a means to an end. You didn't deserve that. Zanele felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her, anger, hurt, but also a deep sadness. And now you think an apology will make it all better? She asked, her voice tinged with bitterness. No, Mkhuseli admitted, his voice heavy with regret. I know it won't, but I need to tell you that I'm sorry. I was so focused on protecting myself, on keeping my heart closed off, that I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. But you changed me, Zanele. You made me see that there's more to life than just business and power. You made me feel again, and that scared me. Zanele looked down at her hands, struggling to process his words. This was what she had wanted to hear, but now that the moment was here, she wasn't sure if it was enough. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again, she said quietly. I understand, Mkhuseli replied, his voice soft. I'm not asking for forgiveness, at least not yet. I'm asking for a chance to make things right, to show you that I can be the man you deserve, but I know I have a long way to go. Zanele was silent for a long time, her mind and heart in conflict. She had seen glimpses of the man Mkhuseli could be, but could she risk her heart again? I need time, she finally said. Time to figure out what I want and if I can ever move past everything that happened. Mkhuseli nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Over the next few weeks, Zanele and Mkhuseli began to rebuild their relationship, but it was a cautious and tentative process. They started meeting regularly, not as business partners, but as two people trying to understand each other and navigate the complicated history between them. Zanele continued her studies and work at the community center, where she found a sense of fulfillment and independence she had never known before. Mkhuseli, for his part, threw himself into philanthropic work, trying to use his wealth and influence to give back to the community in a way that felt meaningful. But as they grew closer, Zanele couldn't help but feel the weight of their past lingering between them. She struggled with her feelings, caught between the desire to move forward and the fear of being hurt again. Every time she let herself trust Mkhuseli, memories of his past actions would resurface, making her question whether he had truly changed. One evening, after a particularly challenging day at the community center, Zanele found herself confiding in an old friend, Thandi, who had always been a source of wisdom in her life. I want to believe that Mkhuseli has changed, Zanele admitted, but I can't help but feel like I'm walking into the same trap all over again. Thandi looked at her with understanding eyes. Change is never easy, especially when trust has been broken. But people can change, Zanele. The question is, Do you believe he's worth the risk? Zanele thought about it for a long moment. I don't know, she said honestly, but I do know that I can't keep living in fear of the past. If I'm going to move forward, I need to do it on my terms, with my eyes wide open. As Zanele and Mkhuseli continued to rebuild their relationship, they faced new challenges that tested their commitment to each other. There were moments of doubt and fear, but there were also moments of connection and understanding that gave Zanele hope. She had made a promise to herself that she would never lose her sense of self again, and she was determined to keep it. Mkhuseli, too, was on his own journey of growth. He had spent so long hiding behind his wealth and power that he had forgotten what it meant to be vulnerable, to truly care about someone. But with Zanele, he was learning to open up, to be honest with his emotions, and to value the relationships in his life. One evening, as they sat together in Zanele's small apartment, she turned to him with a question that had been on her mind for weeks. Do you really think we can make this work, Mkhuseli? Can we build something real after everything? Mkhuseli took her hand in his expression serious yet hopeful. I believe we can, Zanele, but it's going to take time, patience, and a lot of hard work. We're not perfect, and we're going to make mistakes. But if we're both committed to this, I think we can build something real, something that lasts. Zanele looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. It was a long journey ahead, filled with unknowns, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She had found herself again, and now she was ready to see where this new path would take her. Years later, Zanele and Mkhuseli would reflect on their journey together, recognizing how far they had come. Their relationship had been tested in ways they never could have imagined, but it had also grown stronger because of it. They had learned that love wasn't always about grand gestures or perfect endings. It was about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it was hard. Zanele had completed her studies and started her own business, something she was incredibly proud of. Mkhuseli had found a new purpose in his philanthropic work, using his wealth to make a positive impact on the community. They had built a life together, not because of a contract or a deal, but because of a mutual respect and a shared commitment to each other. Their story was far from over, but for now, they were content to take it one day at a time, knowing that the future was theirs to create, with all its possibilities and challenges. It wasn't about happily ever after. It was about living fully, honestly, and bravely, no matter what came next. And in the end, that was more than enough. The end. Thanks for listening. Please like, comment, and share this video.